Welcome to the Extension Reconsidered portion of your plenary session. It's just been amazing, the speakers that we've had here. I mean, some really stunning observations, and I want to just thank everyone that's been up here to date for the last day and a half. So we're going to start a session on Extension Reconsidered. We are talking about extension in this context of design. Extension, as Dean Durgan said, is a group that came into existence more than 100 years ago in Minnesota, but was officially became the law of the land of the United States 100 years ago. And I just want to back up a little bit farther than that, because really the extension and that Smith-Lever Act emerged from an earlier act, the 1862 Morrill Act, which is one of the most ennobling pieces of legislation that led to this public education system, this higher education system throughout the United States. And I can tell you, my position as the statewide director of the regional partnerships, that I've been called to meetings with interested and concerned citizens who have no formal affiliation with the university. I've been called into meetings where professional men of high standing can be moved to tears thinking about the land grant mission and what it means to the people of this country. And this extension is really part of the embodiment of how that mission and that land grant, that belief in every person and every person's dignity, and that bringing us all together up is part of the mission of the land grant and extension. And that's why for over 100 years, and certainly to this day, extension is present in every single one of the 87 counties in Minnesota, for those of you who may not be as familiar. So we're having a conversation, it's an ongoing conversation about extension. We're doing Extension Reconsidered as a thought experiment. This is really, what are our aspirations for this institution that's brought a lot? I mean, think of the folks we just heard from today, Noel with the food, the nature and place-based, the depth and breadth of the knowledge and the capacity that extension brings to communities throughout this entire state. We're going to look at Extension Reconsidered in more depth this afternoon. I welcome everyone who's going to be joining us in that conversation. And right now we're going to look at it from 3 different levels. So as you know, we have all of our bios in here. Please take a look. Eric is here representing the National Extension Reconsidered conversation. There's actually 13 states engaging in this conversation around the nation. University of Minnesota is one of those. And ours is the only one that's using design thinking. So we're trying to bring this new set of tools and methods to bear on the institution of extension. And then we have Andy Furco, who is our Vice President of Public Engagement at the university. He's really going to be talking about extension in a role of the engaged university, the university as a whole. The university is more than extension, but where does extension fit in this? And I think it really feeds back to a lot of what Dean Fisher talked about last night, about the new wave of higher education is going to be engaged. Now, how do we use the assets, the capacity, this feeling that extension has for the communities and that communities have for extension in this conversation? And then I'm pleased to have Jeff Gorfine, who has done some footwork and is representing the community, the engaged and concerned and caring community of people who look to the university and extension to be a partner and equal in our communities. But I just want to say a few words because we're kind of having an academic conversation about extension. But extension really touches communities. It touches us within the academy. It touches us in those place-based areas. As I was doing some research for Extension Reconsidered and a presentation earlier, the Minnesota Historical Society sent me photos. These are photos of blacksmithing classes that Extension was holding nearly 100 years ago. And maybe that's not surprising, but it was blacksmithing for women. And pictures of children who were in the potato club and who were standing there proud of the potatoes they produced, and bread baking. These are real touching into people's lives, and kind of fits back with that whole live, work, make concept. Extension piloted that 100 years ago on the landscape. That is what we did. And so we're here today to say, what does live, work, and make look like for the next 100 years for this institution? And I just have to stop and say that, getting back to what I believe it was Dave Bergman said about sacred spaces and about how some of these issues can touch us. I have a couple sacred spaces myself. One of them is a nature-based place in Big Stone County that's run by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The other one is Borlaug Hall on the St. Paul campus, which has always been a touchstone. I mean, those are probably as far away, I mean, geographically and otherwise, where these ideas that you have heard today are bubbling up. And we also have a bust of Norman Borlaug, who had a very noble idea. He won the Peace Prize for the Green Revolution, and now we have a chance to reflect, more on what direction we're going to take for the future. But just personally, one way that Extension has touched my life, I was in 4-H as a child. I learned how to sew, working with generations of my mother and my grandmother on sewing and cooking. I still use recipes I learned in 3rd grade in 4-H to feed my family today. And when we made a decision in 2007 to leave St. Paul, and now I live in Big Stone County, which is right on the South Dakota border, you really wonder about that change for your family. But that day I saw my daughter wrestling chickens, a chicken under each arm, on her way to the county fair, I knew that it was the right decision to make. So, it really has a real, true, personal, on where we're at, impact in people's lives all over this state. So with that, I think we're going to have a brief introduction, just because a lot of you may not be familiar with Extension. We're going to show the 100-year anniversary. It's just a short clip, about 3 minutes, of a little brief background on Extension, and then we'll move into our plenary speakers.
Hi, I'm Bev Durgan, Dean of University of Minnesota Extension. So how do science-based solutions get from here to here and to here? University of Minnesota Extension. We extend practical research and education to all corners of Minnesota and the world. Our researchers and educators spread university knowledge far beyond its 5 campuses. In fact, over 65% of Extension faculty and staff live and work in Greater Minnesota. They engage individuals, organizations, and communities to ask challenging questions, discover science-based answers, and make a difference. Together, we create a better world by keeping our food safe and affordable, preparing young people to thrive in a complex world, ensuring that Minnesota communities are strong, improving the quality of our lakes and rivers, and helping families make better financial decisions. We've been doing all of this since 1909. That's when the University of Minnesota Extension System was created to bring university research and education to all parts of the state. Over 100 years ago, our faculty traveled in trains to reach every county in the state so they could teach, conduct research, and engage Minnesotans where they lived. In 1914, 5 years after Extension was founded in Minnesota, the Federal Smith-Lever Act created the National Cooperative Extension System to extend research-based knowledge throughout every state. This year, we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Federal Smith-Lever Act. Since our beginning, University of Minnesota Extension has made a positive difference addressing the most pressing issues of the day. Throughout the years, we have remained true to our mission, making a difference by connecting community needs and university resources to address critical issues in Minnesota. Extension receives funding from our federal, state, and county partners to identify needs, discover solutions, and ensure better decisions. Generous gifts from donors support Extension's mission to address today's complex issues. Nearly 35,000 volunteers, including 4-H club leaders, master gardeners, and so many others, give 1.5 million hours of service each year. They are joined by another 1,000 Minnesotans who serve on Extension's advisory boards and committees across the state. Together, we can make a difference. Minnesota is indeed stronger when individuals, organizations, and communities use university research and education to solve problems, develop skills, and build a brighter future.
Thank you. Now we'll bring Eric to talk about the National Extension Reconsidered.
No, I don't. Oh, yeah, I do. Here it is. Hi, greetings from Wisconsin, and I'm really glad to be here and glad that I've been able to be with you for a couple days where I've learned that we in Wisconsin are indeed below average, but I still maintain that our winters are exponentially more mild than here in Minnesota. So I'm really, as Kathy mentioned, representing a team of folks across the country involved in the Extension Reconsidered processes in their respective states, and I'm really glad she introduced it as an experiment because, in fact, that is what's going on. And so I'd like to bear greetings from some folks that maybe some of you know them. Joe Sumner's at Auburn, Michael Spranger at the University of Florida, Sharon Gibson at University of Georgia, Marnica Hargraves from Cornell, and any other person that sent me a personal check. Of which you might also when I go and visit other groups. So anyway, I bring also greetings from the Kettering Foundation in Dayton, Ohio, and from Imagining America, the two organizations largely responsible for convening the initial meetings that led to the Extension Reconsidered processes. And as already been mentioned, in light of the 100-year anniversary of Smith-Lever, extension leaders from 13 states have agreed to invest in an experiment. The Kettering Foundation's stake in this, they're an organization, nonprofit, that really tries to explore how to get people more engaged in public processes and in politics by other means. So one question they had is, to what extent will these processes involve the public, and to what extent will extension play a role in involving the public in reconsidering extension? Imagining America, meanwhile, is particularly interested in how and whether public participation in this process is informed and enhanced through the use of arts, humanities, and design. And so I congratulate your team for incorporating design, significantly design thinking in its work. So I wanted to give you a quick update on what some of the other states are doing. As might be expected, they're all doing something different. I'll start out with Michigan. In Michigan, due to some very deep cuts in the recent past in extension and reorganization, there was not a lot of appetite, to be quite honest, to have a robust conversation about the future of extension. It was just simply too sensitive, and so they ended up creating a series of videos that basically explained the value of extension. And so I would call that, in plain terms, a marketing campaign. And maybe that's fine. There's really no desired specific outcome that has to come out of this, but it's interesting to see how different states have approached it. In Iowa, they held an event in March consisting of a conversation among young people who had no previous connection to extension, and the question they asked the participants is, what defines success in the future, and how can the land-grant system help young professionals reach their personal and professional goals? In Alabama, they held a deliberative forum in July involving participants from Cooperative Extension, Auburn University's Outreach Office, and the College of Liberal Arts. They used a self-developed discussion guide and used a moderated deliberative format to weigh options about the future of Extension. We have not heard the results yet of that conversation. In Mississippi, where Extension resources are very scarce, they've struggled to connect more profoundly with communities. So for their experiment, they did some statewide value mapping to understand what people in Mississippi hold valuable. And they concluded that there are three things that the people of Mississippi bring to the table and enjoy on a regular basis. This shouldn't surprise you: food, music, and religion. So they invited people from communities and backgrounds in these areas and involved in their process, food and music and dialogue about the needs of communities and how Extension could play a greater role. For instance, they invited a local quilting club to participate and have used the connections of that quilting club to reach out to other clubs and groups and further the conversation about what exactly the community needs and how Extension can help meet those needs. In New York, they are planning a series of 4 to 6 events in counties around the state. They're partnering with a civics theater ensemble that in turn is working with 4-H groups to hold conversations about 4-H work. And these are complemented by stage performances that are written and performed by youth at the state fair. In Florida, they're planning an event in September to include a potluck dinner and conversation on the future of Extension. And here the university is partnering with the Center for Humanities and the Public Sphere, with the audience consisting mostly of arts and humanities folks. In Oregon, they did something interesting, and you can find a blog that they wrote on the Imagining America website that explains this. They held an event that they labeled a deliberarium. A word that seems to capture the idea of a traditional public deliberation combined with the whimsy of art-centered design processes. Their goal was to answer 3 questions. What is the role of arts and design in a vibrant community? How is OSU Extension currently engaged through the arts? What additional opportunities there are for OSU Extension in this area, and what would it take to make it happen? And what would communities look like if OSU Extension was more engaged in communities in the areas of art, humanities, and design? I guess the thing that was most interesting to me about this is they started out with some regular talks, but in the middle portion of their event, they actually had raided the student theater lab and pulled out as many props as they could, and they used those props to have the audience basically design a vision for the future of Extension, which included creating haikus and visual art. So they found that to be very effective. In Wisconsin, we've taken a completely different turn. I've got my serious face on here. We are engaged in a very serious naming and framing process, which will include focus groups and surveys and one-on-one interviews with residents throughout the state representing as many different folks from different walks of life as we can. So we're listening and recording their thoughts. And then we will use that to frame a robust guide that we will then use to hold a series of public deliberations around the state, and that the results of those deliberations will be presented to university and state leaders in April of 2015. So this is kind of a longer-term process. Much to my chagrin, they didn't want to include design thinking in any way, shape, or form, or arts or humanities. I was really kind of disappointed. We've got some little subversive activities that are going on, so Dean Durgan, please do not tell anybody about that. But if you permit me, I'd like to bring your attention to at least one provocation before I sit down here. And really, what else did you expect from a Green Bay Packers fan, right? I mean, you did invite me to a polite civil event in Minnesota, so I've got to do my duty here. I want to channel my friend Scott Peters from Imagining America and thank him for his stimulating article, if you haven't read it yet, on the online journal called Choices, appropriately titled Extension Reconsidered from the winter 2014 edition. I highly recommend it. He makes the point that while we celebrate 100 years of Smith-Lever, he said, let's do so with caution, for it is likely that we're remembering, quote, a history that is overly simplistic and celebratory, without any sense of ambiguity, contradiction, or failure, a history that leaves a lot out, and what it leaves out matters. it has led us to miss Extension's wider cultural and civic meaning, significance, and promise, inspiring as well as troubling and relevant, not just in some distant past, but in the present as well. And I would add to that, relevant to our consideration of its future. So let me share quickly 3 conversations, very quick, that you've probably had in the recent past. A friend of mine who works for Extension in New York had a conversation with a colleague about the role of Extension, and they concluded that Extension's routine work is to develop and then get knowledge and programs out to the people. They were somewhat troubled by that conclusion. Last month, they had a conversation with a Wisconsin dairy farmer in my county who's also a long-serving town councilman and former county board chair. He said, I appreciate Extension, but Extension needs to change. It needs to listen to the people and be more responsive to community needs. And here at this conference, and speaking with several individuals, I heard a common refrain. How do we get the ideas of the community to drive the work of Extension and not the other way around? Now, in his Extension Reconsidered article, the reason why I'm hoping you'll read that is he's done some research on what some past thinkers have said about Extension, their vision of Extension, and I'm just going to share a little bit, if you don't mind, of some things that were written in the 1920s and 1930s about Extension that I think shows an aspiration different from the simplicity that we sometimes describe. I'll just read one since my time is up here. The program of Extension work in agriculture and home economics for 20 years has been based on the policy of personal participation on the part of farm people in the analysis of economic, social, and other problems and in the carrying out of the solutions for them. Through these experiences, they have discovered and developed their own capacities for learning and leadership. Studying, thinking, and acting together has stimulated growth and nourished initiative and inspired self-dependence. Out of their achievements in farm, home, community, state, and national programs have come much confidence, courage, and understanding. The development of people themselves through their own efforts, I believe, is the Extension Service's most valuable contribution to society. So I'd like to encourage you to think outside the box later today and not simply rely on necessarily either the best past that we imagine or even the most aspirational past that we imagine, but let's use the past to give ourselves permission to think differently about what Extension could be. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric. I'd like to invite Andy now to please give us the context of Extension within an engaged University of Minnesota.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this event. I'm Andy Ferkel from the Provost Office as Associate Vice President for Public Engagement. And I hope you will allow me to be a little disruptive and provocative in my comments, really challenging our thinking, which is what I think design thinking is intending to do. And I think that one of the things that we need to consider is the fact that what we were asked to consider is the role of Extension in this context of the broader University of Minnesota and what role it plays. And certainly over the last 100 years, the experience that Extension has been able to garner has really created a wonderful legacy for Extension. It is something that people recognize, understand, see, and value tremendously as I travel across the state and across the nation. Indeed, I think most of the outreach work at the University of Minnesota remains in the domain of Extension. And Extension has been the entity to really operationalize that land-grant mission that Kathy mentioned. You know, land-grant mission was great. You know, the pendulum, the proverbial pendulum had swung to the point where institutions of higher education had become so detached from society, and it was time to reinvest in the needs of the society. And the land-grant mission established those institutions that would serve the needs of the state. But yet, those early years of the land-grant mission were really relegated to doing work from a distance, really thinking about the societal issues, but not necessarily enacting those problem-solving approaches. And it was the Smith-Lever Act that really operationalized what the land-grant mission was intended to achieve, and it was through Extension that happened. And so the legacy of extension is very, very strong, as I mentioned. The legacy is about being embedded in the community. As was mentioned, there's extension across all 87 counties in Minnesota. It's serving the needs of the state, and the community is responsive to those needs and those changing needs, and extension's work has evolved and changed as it has responded to the changing needs. It's engaged in long-term partnerships. It's about building those relationships over time and being part of the community. And indeed has extended the reach of the university in places where the campuses, the physical campuses, cannot go and do not go. And this place-based approach has been very, very powerful. But along with that legacy has come, I think, in terms of the purposes, the way it's been purposed, extension has been purposed and structured, some downsides to the legacy. In some ways, an image of extension has been created mainly outside of extension in the broader university as being something that's separate and not as integrated into the university as it might be. It's a part of the university, but not always a visible and central part that's considered in the ways that I think it should be. I also think that many see it as separate from the research and teaching missions of the university. That really extension is about fulfilling the outreach mission of our tripartite mission of research, teaching, and outreach. And you know, after the land-grant institutions were established through the Morrill Act, you know, that pendulum started to swing back as the Germanic ideal of research universities began to become dominant in the US, and those land-grant universities became our prominent public research universities, and more investments was then made into toward research and towards teaching, which really left the support for outreach languishing. And so from the 1950s through the early 2000s, we've seen sort of this movement away from that outreach mission and the divestment from outreach programs, including a divestment from extension. And our state funding, for example, at the University of Minnesota has precipitously dropped year after year after year, where it's now 18% of the total University of Minnesota budget, even though we're a public state university. So what's happened so that pendulum swung back towards that research paradigm, right, being detached and that predominating. And then the last 15 years, we started to swing back. And there's the swinging back that has put pressure on universities to really talk about how relevant institutions of higher education are in this changing economy, in this new paradigm of society. And there are lots of reasons for this pressure now to move back towards embracing community-engaged work and engaging with communities again. And it's the accreditation boards are looking for this, because we say in our mission statement we're going to produce knowledge that benefits society, and they ask, well, where does that happen and how does that happen? The bread and butter of research universities, the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, the federal granting agencies are now requiring increasingly to show broader impacts of that research, to work with external partners, to do interdisciplinary work. That's put pressure on research universities like ours to move in that direction. Our students are asking for this work. We talked about the millennials and the students coming and wanting to make a difference. They want to see connections of their academic work with the real world. We saw that in the video yesterday. In the survey we give at the Twin Cities campus, undergraduate students, 84% of our students say that they look for academic experience that are tied to community needs, 84%. This is something we see at all of our campuses, and I was speaking to former Chancellor Chuck Case yesterday, and he said one of the reasons Crookston adopted an experiential learning approach to its courses is because it was a market issue. That's how we attracted our students, because that's what our students were looking for. Our younger faculty are looking to engage more with communities in their research, in their teaching. And technology innovation, we're becoming more interdisciplinary, more globalized. All of these pressures are having us look at what the role of community engagement is in the broader frame of higher education. This connection to community engagement now extends beyond extension. At the University of Minnesota, there are now over 200 units, centers, institutes, programs, formalized programs that are doing community-engaged work, and in many cases in some of the same communities in which Extension is doing its work. The promotion tenure guidelines have evolved to include public and community engagement as something that's valued. Courses are being developed that have community engagement components. The proliferation of service learning and field-based courses become very popular. More financial investments are being put in that, and the university is undergoing a strategic plan, a 10-year strategic plan, with the focus being on solving the grand challenges of society. And so again, that calls for engagement with society, engagement with communities. So what this has done is really has blurred, to some extent, the unique function that Extension has played over the years. And so this shift, I think, is part of the fact that community engagement is no longer just part of the outreach mission. That's not the only reason we engage with communities, but it's also about enhancing the research that we do and the impact it has, and the teaching that we do, and how we can ensure quality teaching. And there's a lot of engagement work happening that's trying to do that. The dental clinics, the mobile dental clinics that go all across the state and provide access to dental services to communities that don't have those services. Medical students are now doing rotations in communities, not only in hospitals, to learn about the different communities in which they will work and serve. Music, dance, and theater and the arts are working with communities to look at the various cultural aspects of art. We have over 90 initiatives that are working on K-12 issues embedded in school systems and youth development programs to work with youth and schools. And the list goes on: environment, sustainability, poverty. And these things happen not just here in Minnesota, but all across the globe. So the question I ask is, what is or should be Extension's role in light of this growing community engagement across the University of Minnesota? And what are the issues that we need to consider? And I believe Extension plays a very unique and important role in advancing our broader community engagement agenda. And for this, I call on Extension to, as we reconsider Extension, to really think about its experience, its knowledge, and how to do this work. Extension, what I say, gets it. Extension understands how to work with community partners, and that term "with," that word "with," is very, very essential. I say this with all due respect to some of my colleagues outside of Extension who have tried to do some community engaged work because they have to get the grant, and how they've approached that situation and that partnership. And there's a lot of education on the part of those who don't have the experience and the depth of knowledge around community partnership, who can learn from the experience and the knowledge of Extension. And I hope that Extension will see that as a valuable role that it will play within the university. I think one of the things Extension might want to think about is not only aligning itself with the land-grant mission, but also with the research and teaching missions of the university, to work with the student bodies at the university that want to engage in finding ways of building that nexus, and I know some work has already been done in that regard, but to really cultivate that energy and that excitement and getting more of our students involved. I think that's a way of getting more embedded into the, continue to be embedded into the fabric of the university. I think the work that Extension has done on assessment, for example, is outstanding. Ripple mapping and all the other assessment tools. This is a challenge, and it's not just doing the work, but we have to show the so what. And Extension's able to do that and understands it. So come teach us and help us understand that. The notion of being place-based and focusing on partnerships, not projects. A lot of the community engaged work we're seeing now is project-based. The project starts, the grant ends, the project ends, right? But how do you build those larger partnerships? And we're really moving the broader university to try to think about partnerships and getting away from the projects. And this notion of how you consider community needs. This is not just doing engagement for utilitarian purposes. This is really about doing real change in communities, and you know how to do that well. So as we engage in this design thinking questions, I just would like to pose 3 questions, 3 charges maybe, to Extension to see if we can move the conversation forward. So one of the questions is, as broader parts of the university engage in the same communities as those in which Extension has built a relationship, what will be the interface between these new endeavors and Extension's work? And this is oftentimes that the community sees us as the university, as one single entity, and doesn't distinguish between or among the different programs. So how do we work together if we're going to be involved in the same communities? What will be Extension's advantage and unique role as other university units conduct Extension-like work? And how might we use the university's current broader focus on community engagement and public engagement as an opportunity to raise the visibility and value of Extension's work and its integration into the broader research and teaching missions of the university? Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. It's nice to have someone of Andy's position that's really there to stand for that outreach mission of the university. But I want to also, as Jeff's coming up, just say that the partnerships have also helped coin our citizen members, not just outreach, it's in-reach. It's the community's ability to reach into the university. So we talk as often about in-reach as well. And with that, I would like to have Jeff Gorfine.
Well, good late morning to everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to share. And I am honored and indeed humbled to have been asked to do a wee bit of visioning about the promise of Extension over the next 100 years. This Extension Reconsidered effort is, for me, the beginning of a great long-term thought and action experiment. And if it turns out to be the beginning or the end of the beginning of that experiment, then I must be honest, what we will have experienced is a PR campaign. We need to continually take the pulse of the people, and that includes the university and other institutions. How we end up doing this on a continuing basis is both the promise and the challenge we face over the next 100 years. We're not here now to worry or wonder about form and function. We're here to dream, to imagine anew. In his 1992 book, Sacred Eyes, L. Robert Keck points out that the bottom line on sustaining relationships consists of three questions. Is what you are bringing to the relationship empowering? Is the relationship empowering you? If the answer to either of these questions is no, then the follow-up question is, do you have the courage to change it? As this millennium was upon us, Paul Brutlog, one of the grandfathers of the Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships, once stated to me that the most critical issue for Minnesota moving into the 21st century will be how the U of M fulfills its land-grant mission. Founded in the faith that men are ennobled by understanding, dedicated to the advancement of learning and the search for truth, devoted to the instruction of youth and the welfare of the state. This encapsulation of the land-grant mission was carved in June 1936 on the facade of Northrop Auditorium. And let's make no mistake about the meaning of these words. Our manifest destiny as Minnesotans will be greatly guided and determined by the nature and quality of the relationship between the people and their university. In the 1980s, Arthur Himmelman did research at the Humphrey Institute on public-private initiatives. A major finding of this research was that folks who organize to accomplish XYZ end up failing or not being as effective and therefore fading away by not spending intentional time up front and on a continuing basis discussing their philosophy and what they value about their endeavor. An essential grounding that we don't seem to do a lot of. Because of this truth, I call for us, for Extension, for the university, to revisit its land-grant roots, to dig more deeply into what its values and philosophy are with being in relationship and partnership in public and civic engagement on a more consistent basis with the smaller, more diverse concentrations of wealth for long-term interests, the people and the communities of Minnesota, rather than with larger, more narrow-minded concentrations of wealth for short-term gain. We must work to restore more equitable balance to the imperative of serving the welfare of the state. An August 23, 2001 Star Tribune editorial stated, "A university that seems fixated on money-making, research, and work development connects with a fraction of Minnesotans. One dedicated to helping average citizens solve problems, public problems, and govern themselves wisely has broader appeal, and over time may do more to secure the good life in Minnesota." This, to me, is the great promise which Extension can help cultivate and nurture both within the university and within the citizenry of Minnesota. And it is a promise that will yield fruit of unimaginable beauty throughout the countryside. It is also a promise which begs us to answer some questions about what we value and profess. So why are each of us here in this room today? Why are we here together exploring a reconsideration of Extension? What do you value and what is valuable about the work you do? How does being part of a land-grant university inform and mold Extension's practices? How is Extension meeting the needs of the small towns, small businesses, and small farms of Minnesota? What is and what has been Extension's public value and impact? And how and why does it matter? In its May 2012 10-point plan for advancing and institutionalizing public engagement at the University of Minnesota, the Office of Public Engagement stated, "At a time of diminished public support and novel intellectual and practical challenges, the engaged university holds the promise for a constructive new era in higher education in which civic responsibilities and public contributions become central institutional priorities, affecting research and scholarship, teaching and learning, outreach, and partnership." How will Extension help us to realize this promise for a constructive new era in higher education? And how will Extension help establish and make stronger these institutional priorities of civic responsibility and public contribution so that the common good becomes rooted deeper, much deeper into the heart and soul of the body politic? Do we as advocates of the engaged university truly understand that engagement is something that goes well beyond cooperative extension and conventional outreach and even beyond most conceptions of public service? Can we make a promise to work hard to replace our inherited ideas of engagement, which emphasize a one-way process of transferring knowledge and technology from the university as the source of expertise to its key constituents, with an engagement ideal that has embedded within it a commitment to sharing and reciprocity and envisions partnerships, two-way streets defined by mutual respect among the partners for what each brings to the table? By doing so, won't the research and scholarship, the teaching and learning, and the outreach and partnerships arising out of such a process be more beneficial for the long-term welfare of the state, and as a consequence, build greater capacity and competence for everyone involved? I see Extension becoming a phalanx within the culture of the university, advocating for change in the way the university goes about doing its business of research, scholarship, teaching, learning, outreach, and service to the Commonwealth. In the beginning of this advocacy, I see Extension as being viewed as an apostate to the status quo. But when the dust finally settles and the final analysis is made, Extension will be known and cherished as the loyal heretic. For it will be clearly understood and embraced that the change Extension brought up for discussion, deliberation, and action was the very change that was needed during this time and place of our experiment in democracy and of our unending search for truth. And it will be seen as a change that made Minnesotans more vital and more resilient in our capacities to work through the challenges and opportunities of our future presence. I see Extension as that vanguard within the culture of the academy, advocating and continuing to show by example how to employ and value the principles, methodologies, and practices of public scholarship, especially of the interdisciplinary variety, that not only can cross-fertilize with other departments, centers, institutes, colleges, and university campuses, but can also more strongly undergird the applied research efforts needed for the health and viability of the many, many communities of interest within Minnesota. The need for the methodologically rigorous generalist is profound. Our information, economic, industrial, agricultural, and natural resource sciences, technologies, and techniques, and the advances of highly specialized fields of knowledge, not to mention our production consumer crazed mentality and the money-driven infatuation with control and power, are far outdistancing not only our ability to make sense of who we are in relation to each other or with each other, but also to make sense of the actual long-term good we are doing together. Ralph Nader once said, "Until unstructured citizen power is given the tools for impact, structured power, no matter how democratic in form, will tend toward abuse, indifference, or sloth. Building a new way of life around citizenship action must be the program of the immediate future, built upon a commitment to citizenship as an obligation, a continual receivership of our time, energy, and skill." I therefore see Extension as playing a major role in not only revitalizing the democratic ideal within the academy, but also reinvigorating democratic practices throughout Minnesota. I see Extension more forthrightly supporting the essential need for active citizenship, which calls on us to think first and foremost as citizens with a commitment to working through the challenges and exploring opportunities in citizen-driven community-university partnerships. I see Extension building exquisite relationships by solidly constructing the two-way roads of in-reach and outreach. And this construction will be done with voices from all walks of life asking the right, down-to-earth questions important to them. Such questions in two-way roads will enable us to more accurately identify, analyze, develop solutions for, and work through local, regional, and statewide environmental, social, economic issues and problems. And we will be unswervingly committed to the ethic, "If you disagree with me, you have something to give me. If you are sincere and seek the truth as best you may, honestly, with modest care, your thought is growth to mine, you deepen my vision." And here's an observation from 1979 from a book called The Sabbath. Technical civilization, this is a long one, technical civilization stems primarily from the desire of man to subdue and manage the forces of nature. Technical civilization is the product of labor, of man's exertion of power for the sake of gain, for the sake of producing goods. Technical civilization is man's conquest of space. Yet to have more does not mean to be more. The power we attain in the world of space terminates abruptly at the borderline of time. But time is the heart of existence. To gain control of the world of space is certainly one of our tasks. The danger begins when in gaining power in the realm of space, we forfeit all aspirations in the realm of time. There is a realm of time where the goal is not to have, but to be, not to own, but to give, not to control, but to share, not to subdue, but to be in accord. Life goes wrong when the control of space, the acquisition of things of space, becomes our sole concern. I see Extension therefore cultivating a new way of doing business for the university and beyond, a way that better balances our actions in time and space. By helping us to put into clearer perspective the notion of the marketplace university, Extension will help to enable us to build a more viable land-grant mission and civic engagement force within our state. We are woefully off-kilter with our expectations of, belief in, and the value we place upon the marketplace. We delude ourselves in thinking that it, and it above all else, will deliver us to the promised land of prosperity, justice, and equity, as well as to an equal and fair distribution of goods and services. So in conclusion, I see Extension Reconsidered as the beginning of the beginning, as a never-ending process of renewal, of what Pete Seeger called the folk process. And in this spirit, I'd like to close with a Farm Boy Remembers, a poem by the Minnesotan Leo Dangle. Saturday was for cleaning barns, forking out tons of manure. There are more significant ways to spend a Saturday when the snow is melting, but this was ours. Throw out the shit and put down clean straw. Renewal has never since been so simple. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. All right. Well, we are running a little late, but we are open for questions. Why don't we send a couple mics around, and if anyone have questions for our three speakers.
Yeah, my name's Dave, and I'm with ArtOrg, an arts group based in Cannon Falls. And we get out throughout the state doing events. We've taught printmaking to kids 2 hours north of here in Hallock and Roseau and Warroad. But Cannon Falls, of course, is down south. And I'd like to first thank Extension because we're being funded. We have a Center for Rural Design project to look at our home base now in Cannon Falls, and we're very excited about that. But through these travels of doing art projects, we did one project in Dundas, Minnesota. We did the 20 Views of Dundas. So we brought 20 artists together, and they all did their own particular view of Dundas and the history of Dundas. Well, we came across another, I guess, the fingerprint of Extension, because there's an old group in Dundas called the Women's Study Group, Dundas Women's Study Group, and it was formed in 1924, so it's 90 years old and still very active. And I don't think, and it was an Extension project, and your blacksmithing comment made me think of that. But as Extension is being reconsidered, maybe there could be men's study groups too, so.
Did we have any other questions for our panelists? All right.
I'd just like to say, I thoroughly enjoyed all three of you speaking, and listening to Jeff at the end, his final comment reminds me a lot of my childhood and spending time on my grandfather's farm, so thank you so much.
Abby. No.
It's a question for Eric. Will there be a way to see what the different states, as this is sort of wrapping up, what they did, what their outcomes were? How do we see some of the outcomes of this?
Great question. Imagining America has a website. If you go to their website and then look and type in just on a Google search Extension Reconsider, it'll take you right to that page. And there's a series of clickable buttons on what the projects are, who's doing what. And I think they were actually very much encouraging the states to report out on what they did. One thing I didn't get to was the big $64,000 question is, so, is this experiment having any impact on changing any thinking in Extension? And the answer is we don't know yet because we haven't gotten any results back. So when you do get further along in your process, I hope that you'll post some of your ideas to that website. There's also a blog, and so they're asking people to contribute to the blog just as a way of a challenge. Greg Hutchins from University of Wisconsin Extension posted a blog, so invite someone from University of Minnesota to do so. Oh, did you? Oops.
And repost. And one other outcome from the Extension Reconsidered is that one of the principal investigators, Scott Peters, will be compiling what all the states are doing and what they're finding, and there will be an Extension Reconsidered book coming out in the next year. So I do have,
Thank you so much for all your talks. I have a question for Andy. You talked about the two realities, the extension history and its role, and then also the emerging role of the new community engaged units. And other speakers talked about this two-way street, this idea of university to community and back. I see the potential for a two-way street also between extension within the university and all these other units. So what thoughts do you have about how we might proceed and make it within the course of this project an integrated process?
Thank you, Viraja. That's an excellent question. I think that's exactly right. I think the call to have extension play a role in educating those within the university, doing in-reach within the university as units that are new to community engaged work begin to participate more fully. And I think that there's a lot to be learned. I think one of the challenges is that those outside of extension aren't very familiar with what extension does. So part of it is to really be able to educate those outside of extension within the university about the great work extension does. And working at a big institution, it's very difficult to get any message out to anyone. But I think this is one that really needs to happen if we are, as an institution, going to really succeed as an engaged university. Because I think in some cases we could undo some of the great work that the extension has done if we're not very careful. So that's another reason I think extension needs to be at the table.
Can I ask a question? Okay, I have a question for you, Andy, following up on this question. So one of the challenges for scholars in traditional academic environments is that the incentives aren't really present a lot of the times to engage in the outreach work that we're talking about. Is there any discussion at the university level to change incentives in terms of tenure and promotion?
Yes, there have been quite a bit of discussion, there has been quite a bit of discussion about this. In 2007, we revised the promotion tenure guidelines to include international work, public engagement, interdisciplinary work to really encourage faculty to take this on and incorporate that and to reward it where it was appropriate. I think the other way we're approaching this is we're changing the discourse. The issue is that although we're a land-grant university, many of our faculty don't identify themselves as working at a land-grant university. They see themselves working at a research university or institution of higher learning, and that's their identity. And so we don't talk about the community engaged work only in terms of outreach mission or land-grant mission. We talk about it in terms of our research mission and the fact that part of our research mission is to produce research of significance that benefits society. That's what we say in our mission. And part of our challenge to our faculty is what is the societal benefit of the research that we're doing, either directly or indirectly, either on the short-term or long-term basis, but in the body of work that we are producing, what is that benefit to society? And that's the conversation we have. And many faculty actually can point to that. Now, that may not be done through an engaged lens with community, but that's the first step in seeing how what I do as a scholar in a particular discipline might actually connect with external entities. And the same thing with teaching. We talk about what are the elements of quality teaching. We want to do quality teaching. And we know from the research on the elements, pedagogical elements that promote excellence in teaching. Active learning, experiential, constructivist, all the kinds of things that you saw yesterday in the film. So we talk about it in those terms. We see community engagement as a strategy, as a vehicle for doing other important things that the university is trying to accomplish. The goal is not to do community engagement. The goal is to work with community engagement as a way to have mutual benefits for the community, but also for what the university is trying to accomplish and needs to accomplish.
Thank you.